Welcome to Beyond the Plate, Industry Talks by Le Cordon Bleu. In this podcast, we get some real insight into the food and hospitality industry from a variety of renowned chefs, industry experts, and Le Cordon Bleu alumni. Join us as we hear the fascinating stories and unique experiences behind some of the best-known names in the industry. Hello and welcome to Beyond the Plate. I am delighted to be joined today by Ben Mervis, author of the British Cookbook and editor and founder of Fare magazine. Ben, thank you ever so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, despite a bit of rain here in Glasgow. Thanks for having me.
Of course, no problem at all. Thank you for coming. And, you kind of have to expect that rain over in Scotland or England in general, really.
Yeah, it's part of the deal.
It is, indeed. So, your big project you just released recently is the British Cookbook. Could you tell us in your own words about this book?
So the British Cookbook is a celebration of British cuisine. It's quite a deep dive into regionality, into diversity and history, the history of British food. And it's intended really just as much as a go-to household cookbook as it is a comprehensive reference book. I want people to come to this book first when they're looking to explore British food. And I think that the way it brings together different regions and different foods and kind of shows you how they how food of different regions are joined together and set apart, I think is a really interesting way of looking at British food and treating it seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing as a British person to know so little that is in the book. And I'm fortunate enough to have a copy, so I definitely will be using it for reference myself.
Yeah, great.
So, of course, you're not British yourself, but you came here for university. What are some of the main differences to the food culture in the UK versus the US?
Ooh, good question. I'd say in some ways it's probably actually easier to look at some of the similarities and the ways that you can see British roots in American food, which is one of the things that I thought about a lot in the course of my research. Things like American pancakes or certain Southern dishes like stew and dumplings, or even American biscuits, and things that kind of exist in an isolated example in the US, like a chicken pot pie, which is probably the only example I can think of a British-style pie existing in the US, or gingerbreads, for instance. I think it's super interesting, but most American influences, I think, on British food are more contemporary, so the kind of burger and hot dogs and barbecue and that kind of stuff. And we love to put cheese on everything. I think the first time as a student that I had a bacon roll, I was like, why is there no cheese on it? Of course, I've never actually had it with cheese since, so don't worry.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I suppose, we do have a lot of American influence now, as you say, in a contemporary culture with the kind of fast food, and there's quite a lot of crossover, I suppose, for both cuisines. Yeah,
I'd say one more example that I'm quite partial to is the American tradition of within baking of using a buttercream frosting. That's kind of an American thing that or at least is more American than it is British in a traditional sense. You don't get too many buttercream frosted cakes in the UK.
We kind of like a drizzle.
You do now, but
but I think we're more akin to a drizzle or a little dusting of icing sugar.
Yeah.
I hate buttercream, actually. I can't stand
it. Really?
Sorry. Yeah, no, it's not my thing at all.
Oh, no.
I'm very sorry about that. Now, speaking of things that are disgusting, I was very interested by the festive goose blood tart recipe. But your description does make it sound quite delicious. you say it's almost like a rich chocolatey ganache. I kind of want to believe that. Now, do you think that this could make a comeback, as people are more inclined to use the whole animal these days, with the kind of trend in recent years of nose to tail butchery, or do you just think it's a bit too much for people?
Yeah, I think that it certainly could make a comeback. I think in a kind of mainstream way, it's probably too difficult commercially to get goose blood in supermarkets, and even just trying to think about how you might I don't know, maybe you could get dehydrated blood packets. I think that that's a little bit too much for a supermarket, maybe. But I think that certainly within restaurants and on restaurant menus, this is actually one of the recipes that a lot of my chef friends are interested in replicating, or one that stands out to them at when they look through the book. So I think that it's one that could definitely inspire people and get them thinking about how this ingredient could be used in a new and different way. And I think it's an extension of nose to tail dining and the way that we use blood in black pudding.
Yeah.
It could be used the same in sweet things too. As long as it's done wisely and carefully, So I'm quite open-minded. I don't see why not.
No, for sure. And I think, it's no more unpalatable than any other part of the animal. And obviously it's something that we can use. And as you say, black pudding is, a very popular British dish still to this day. And, maybe it's the name. I don't know. Maybe that's the thing. It needs to not have blood in the title.
Yeah, exactly.
So another sort of typical stereotype for British cuisine is overboiled vegetables, which, I'll admit, I think that is common, and probably not in this generation, but maybe my parents or my grandparents, it was all about overboiled vegetables. And as it's Christmas, I'm thinking about this dreaded sprout at the Christmas table, which is commonly mistreated. And you make a point of this in the book, talking about vegetables. And you do admit that Brits are quite bad with their vegetables. So are we still doing it? And what's the worst British crime against vegetables that you've witnessed?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll have to think about that. I think that, yeah, it is definitely a typical stereotype, but I don't think it's necessarily that is necessarily true anymore. Not in a broad sense. I think that it's a case by case basis, and for the people who care about cooking your vegetables properly. I think there's enough information and examples out there, and I think that with how interconnected we are today, with whether you're watching a British cooking show or one of a different network or cuisine, I think people are paying more attention, and there's just a bit more knowledge and a bit more understanding of, okay, well, you don't have to absolutely boil it until it's gray, or, roast something until it's gray. Yeah. I mean, there are certain timings to use. So I think it's just about, in to some extent, the spread of information. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some, really delightful and delicious looking vegetable-based recipes in the book as well, which you wouldn't, which don't kind of stand out as particularly British in their description or in their appearance. So it's interesting to see that. But we do have, even though we don't have the best kind of climate or anything for growing a lot of crops, there are sort of root vegetables and things that can be used, really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So again, speaking of Christmas, Christmas pudding has, again, something I'm not a fan of. Sorry, I'm so sorry. But you mentioned in the book that the recipe has hardly changed in 200 years. And a lot of classic Christmas desserts and recipes have been getting a modern treatment, such as mince pies. You've got salted caramel mince pies and all sorts of things like that. Do you think Christmas pudding is likely to get a modern treatment? And how do you feel about that?
I think that it's certainly. Well, I think that it could, but I also think that it, it's recognized. So I'll backtrack slightly. I think that Christmas pudding is certainly very similar to how it was 200 years ago, but from house to house, it will change, and a family recipe will change from another home and one from another. And I think that a lot of people are put off on either the amount of spice or dried fruit or the amount of booze or whatever it is. It's all a bit much, and I think that you taste slightly different versions, and there's no one set Christmas pudding to be made. And I think that as an extension of that, there's kind of tweaks on the concept that could make it, I don't know, a little bit more accessible for new people, and still remain recognizably Christmas pudding. So I think that absolutely. Similarly, though, I think that similar to how mince pies, you get all these different flavor combinations today. I think that a Christmas pudding could be, just an idea of something with dried fruit or fruit and spices and booze, and kind of that as a sort of foundation of, I've seen various, I think ginger sponge puddings in the supermarket right next to the Christmas pudding, and other such kind of like spiced seasonal, incorporating fruits. So it's sort of adjacent, Christmas pudding adjacent. Yeah. And actually our food stylist on the cookbook, she, like yourself, is not a huge fan of Christmas pudding, and she actually made the golden syrup sponge from the book for her Christmas pudding, and she loved it, and so did her family. So that's one thing that you could do.
That does sound good. It does sound good. But maybe I just haven't found the right Christmas pudding for me.
Yeah.
So I need to do some more research. Maybe my mum's just not a very good cook. So you mentioned in our other interview for our Christmas with the Cordon Bleu magazine that you're quite partial to a clouty dumpling.
Yes.
Living in Scotland, as you do. Now, there are some really amazing and hilarious dish names in the book, and I just wondered what some of your favourites.
There are many very funny sounding names through the book, and plenty that actually didn't even make it into the book. Some of the ones off the top of my head, Rumbledy Thumps, Singing Hinnies, Throaty Pudding, Spotted Dick. Even as an American, so of course as an American, at some point in my life, all these names were new to me. So even something as well known as Toad in the Hole was a very strange name to learn, many years ago. But there were even more, as I said, that especially ones rooted in northern Scotland, in Shetland and far north, that didn't make it into the book, but they have names that are rooted in the Shetland dialect, which has influences from quite a lot of influence from Norway, and so you have names that sound like trolls almost. Quite a few very silly names that didn't make it in.
No, I love it, and I think that more foods should be named, in a more interesting way. Like as you say, Toad in the Hole. It's great. Yeah, makes things a bit more interesting, for sure. So I was pleased to see the recipe for coronation chicken included in the book, which was of course originally created by Le Cordon Bleu chefs, for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. And famously, this dish includes curry powder as its main flavour. How important are international flavours in British cuisine?
For the last few hundred years, I think British people have sought to replicate dishes from abroad. Even curry even predates fish and chips, for instance, by about 50 to 100 years.
Wow.
And I think home cooks have been doing their best to kind of conjure up a taste of their travels. And that first curry recipe in a cookbook, in a British cookbook anyway, coming in the 1740s, I think it's Hannah Glass. That's ages and ages ago. If you think about it, in a sense, that's one of the oldest recipes in my book. So I think it's really deeply rooted. And of course, we think about it today. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I've just had, last night a jalfrezi, and this is a big part of our lives is the presence of all these flavors that come from the British Empire and the mix of peoples that exist in the UK today, and the new dishes that have been created or adapted here, and which, this is all reflecting the kind of shift in taste and palate that British people have.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there one dish that most surprised you that turned out to be created in Britain?
So not for me exactly, but many British people that I spoke to were really surprised by the fact that banoffee pie actually is a British dish and not an American one, which I always found funny because, of course, for me, having come from America, I knew it was not a British or not an American dish. And I guess there's something about the elements of it, the bananas or the caramel or something, that the base that seem American to people, and as I believe I said in the book, it actually there was a supermarket version of the banoffee pie that's called an American pie, and I think that maybe played into it somehow.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I was going to say, absolutely, that was the one that surprised me, which now I feel absolutely stupid about. But I think perhaps because it's something that you typically see in this country on our American-themed restaurant menus. I think it's just someone has sold that lie. Absolutely. It's very strange.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell everyone that they're wrong. Spread the truth.
Exactly.
So is there a recipe you've discovered that has now become part of your regular menu that you make at home?
Well, again, not to keep sidestepping, but not so much something that I've discovered, but my girlfriend, who's Hungarian, had never had mince and tatties before. So in the process of making the book, she fell in love with that, and that is a regular staple of the kitchen. And the recipe, as I say in the book, is dark and ambrosial, and it's the perfect dish for a day like at least today in Glasgow.
That's good, though. It's nice to find a new kind of staple comfort food that is just, perfect for a certain time of year. And particularly this time of year. So what are you most looking forward to eating or making during the festive season?
I've got a sweet tooth, so honestly for me it's probably the mince pies or the puddings. As I mentioned before, the stylist on her book, she made the golden syrup sponge for one of her Christmas puddings, and I'm pretty tempted to do the same. But that recipe kind of is like a basic template, and you can change it up so you can add a little bit of spice and flavor in it. I'm thinking maybe going a little off piste and maybe doing a kind of
some kind of hybrid.
Ginger, something like I was talking about before, a lighter kind of Christmas pudding or something like that. But always, mince pies has to be the answer.
Absolutely.
It's the season.
Absolutely, of course. Well, the season has been since October, I think.
Yeah. Or September nowadays.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
As supermarkets
creeping up.
would suggest.
My grandma used to make treacle tart at Christmas time, and I think it kind of cements your mouth shut, which is probably why she made it for the children.
Yeah.
What do you hope people will gain from the British Cookbook?
I'm hoping that people will get a deeper understanding of the depth and regionality of British food, and to be honest, take it a bit more seriously and embrace the fact that it's delicious. I think that there's a lot to learn through the book, even if you are British, and I think there's a lot to learn about the unique foods of different regions. I mean, if you're from Scotland, you might take for granted potato scones, tatty scones, or if you're from the Midlands, you might, be well versed in a Staffordshire oatcake. But if you're not from particular areas with these unique foods, then you might not know about them at all, whereas people from those places maybe take them for granted. So I think that having a lot of these foods in one place really shows you the diversity and how much there actually is. And I think that you'd recognize maybe most of the dishes in the book, and the ones that you don't recognize, you would at least see how they kind of come from the natural larder and what is growing in the UK.
Absolutely. Well, it's certainly very interesting and very enlightening, and I just love how everything, all the recipes and all the sections are accompanied by that historical context and geographical context. It's a beautiful book, really.
Thank you.
Been enjoying it very much, and I will continue to enjoy it for certain.
Thanks so much.
So finally, can you share any upcoming projects with us?
Well, I am also running a food culture magazine called Fare, which is a food-focused travel magazine. Each issue is a different city, and we release 2 issues a year. It's a bit more like a book, but it doesn't have a hardcover, 200 pages and so on. So we're releasing our Copenhagen issue this festive season, and so that's always on the go. But I'm very interested in hopefully returning to the topic of British food culture, maybe going in the direction of drinks or sandwiches. I'm just thinking of things that I sort of intentionally left out of the book because I didn't want to make it 1,000 pages, instead of nearly 500. But I think there's so much left to keep covering in British food, and I'd like to kind of keep at it with really demonstrating all the wealth there is to it.
Well, I'm sure we will all look forward to whatever comes next, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you ever so much for joining us, and where can people buy your book? Where can they buy the magazine?
Well, you can buy the book in any good bookstore or online in the usual places. And the magazine, we do have a number of independent stockists throughout the UK and worldwide, but you can also order online at faremag.com, FAREMAG.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that you have a Merry Christmas.
Well, thanks so much, and you too.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Plate, Industry Talks by Le Cordon Bleu. Keep up to date with all our news and episodes by following us on social media or by signing up to our newsletter. Links are included in the episode notes. Until next time, à bientôt!